Have you ever been driving on the freeway, listening to the radio? You're hearing the words, but not grasping the message. You're just driving. And the next thing you know, you've missed your exit and you've been zoning out for a few minutes. We do that in cars, but do we ever do that with people? Have we done that with our veterans? I'm Jeremy Graham, and this is the Next Chapter podcast. Today we're talking about listening and what it really means to hear what a veteran is telling you. On the Next Chapter podcast, we kick things off by talking to Next Chapter lead clinicians Damian McCabe and Ken Kurtner. Today, I was asking them how to be a better listener, especially when it comes to talking to a veteran who might be in crisis. So something I've kind of been thinking about and learning about myself, I'm not always the best listener. Like, I hear stuff, but I don't always fully listen and grasp what somebody's saying. As clinicians, how do you guys, do you ever zone out when somebody's talking to you in a session or something like that?
I think the challenge, the challenge for listening, Jeremy, especially when we think about our veterans, in some cases, people are afraid to ask a question because then they have to decide, what am I going to hear? How am I going to listen to it? And what do I do with that information when I listen to it? And, what we as clinicians have sort of learned over time is that a vast majority of folks, and this is true for veterans and their families as well, one of the greatest benefits they get out of speaking with a therapist, and really anyone, is knowing that someone is listening, knowing that there is a place or a person to take, their thoughts to, that they will be heard. And so there's something different between, what it is to listen and someone feeling heard. So you could nod your head all day, you could drop in a lot of ahas and hums, but there's something about facial expression. There's something about acknowledgement that communicates to a person that you heard what they said. There's nothing in listening that says you have to agree. There's nothing in the, sort of this idea of listening to someone that you have to support their ideas. But communicating that you actually hear them is critical. So for our veterans and our families, when we talk about military cultural competency and we're talking about people who are trained in a way that helps a veteran feel heard, what we're really talking about is, supercharging their listening skills in a way that communicates back to that veteran that they are heard.
I think the other thing is a lot of times when we're in conversation, people really think about what they're going to say before the other person's even done talking. And so that's not really being heard. That's more, yeah, I got you, whatever. But let me tell you about this too. And so really sitting in and being heard is keeping your mind blank and really focusing and really paying attention to what the other person is saying, and then thinking about and processing what they just said and then responding.
We have this urge as humans that when someone tells us something significant, that we feel we need to respond to it one way or another. And we feel this needed if we don't respond, that somehow we're communicating to the other person that we either don't understand, we can't cope with that information, or we're shocked, right? And instead of trying to think through, okay, what's the right thing to say here, is to think about just acknowledging that's a lot of information. What's the most important thing about that you want me to hear? And to ask that person, what's the most important thing in what they just said that they want you to hear? In that same way, you're actually saying, what's the most important thing you want me to understand? And in doing that, you invite them to tell you more. Again, for us, it's different because we hear these kind of comments every day. And so for someone to tell us, I'm thinking about taking my own life, I'm thinking about jumping off a roof, or I'm thinking about shooting myself, we've done this so long and we're in this mode that it's intuitive for us to say, tell me more about that. But if this is your battle buddy, or if this is your partner, if this is your dad or your son or your daughter, it's okay to step back a little bit. And when it comes to listening, the most important thing you can do is acknowledge to them that you heard that. In some ways, one of the easiest ways to do that is to simply say, I heard that.
When someone says they drop a bombshell on you and say, I've been thinking about hurting myself in some way, shape, or form, Oftentimes people rush to fill that silence because they feel uncomfortable and they say things like, well, why would you want to do something so stupid? And, or that's selfish or something along those lines. And so what you're telling the person that just told you that they've been thinking about hurting themselves is, I'm invalidating your feelings and I'm not hearing you. Like, I'll listen to what you said. You said that you wanted to hurt yourself, but I'm not going to hear you say that because it makes me uncomfortable. And so the individual that was able to share and worked up enough courage to say, hey, this is what I've been thinking about, then feels like they need to suffer in silence more because it makes you uncomfortable to hear things like that. So oftentimes it's a lot better to, as we say, just shut up and listen.
Our story today comes from Paul McShann. Paul is one of the strongest and bravest individuals I can think of. He comes from a military family, and that legacy passed down to his son, Ricky, who joined the Marines. In this segment, Paul talks about Ricky, who, after suffering head trauma during his service, took his own life. Losing a child is every parent's biggest fear. The circumstances of Ricky's death are especially tragic. I can't emphasize enough how much I admire Paul's strength and courage to share his story. I'd also like to caution listeners that this segment contains talk of suicide, adult language, and heavy subject matter.
My name is Paul McShann. I'm a 20-year Army veteran. I've had family in the military ever since World War II, starting with my father. So my son, which is my only biological child, joined the Marine Corps. In 2007, he deployed to Iraq, and they fought in Fallujah. They took back Fallujah in 2007. Right after that, they came back to the States for a short period of time, and then they redeployed in 2008 to Afghanistan. There was quite a few guys injured and killed in Fallujah, and the same thing happened in Afghanistan. We counted, oh gosh, I don't remember. It was over 7 IED explosions that we know about. I know there was more. The last IED explosion he was in, they hit a IED. He was blown out of the Humvee. He was in the gunner's hatch. Dislocated his shoulder. He was out for like 3 or 4 minutes. The doc came, kicked his shoulder back into place. He grabbed his weapon and went back to fighting and refused medical care. Exactly 5 months after that last explosion, he shot himself. And that really flipped my world upside down. He and his mom was thick as thieves. And so I basically done majority of the funeral arrangements and everything like that myself. And I got the idea that I got this shit. I got it under control. And the stupidest thing happened. One of his favorite songs was Chicken Fried by the Zach Brown Band. Every time I got in my truck, either that song was going off the radio or coming on the radio, or I heard the whole thing. And all of a sudden, shit just piled on top of me, and I caught myself sitting in a ditch crying like a baby.
After Ricky's death, Paul started to process some of his own injuries that he incurred during his time in the Army, and he came to this hard realization.
I am broke. I am broke from 20 years in the service. And the reason I'm broke is because I denied it. I denied my PTSD for years until Ricky died. I fell in 1979 off of a truck and cracked my number 4 vertebrae. I did all kinds of crazy shit after that. I started having, when it healed, arthritis build in and put pressure on nerves. So I get bolt of lightning going down my back and legs and dropping me down to my knees. Take some Tylenol. The candy of the day was 800 milligram Motrin. You pop the 800 milligram Motrin, you take a couple of naps and you go back to work. I refused to acknowledge that I had PTSD. And so I need to address that issue with myself, and then have that conversation with the family members and the spouses. And then together we need to go and get support as a group.
Once Paul addressed his own PTSD, he was ready to talk and learn more about Ricky's suicide, helping him come to terms and find his next chapter in life.
What I have learned is, with all the ID explosions that he has suffered, I talked to a neurosurgeon right after he had died, and she said that your son didn't kill himself. His body killed him. And so I asked, because I never grew out of the why thing. And so explained that to me. And she said, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a diesel tech. And she said that if you take a vehicle and it was submerged in water, like in a flood, you can take that vehicle out of the water, you can drain it, you can change the oil, you can replace the spark plugs, new fuel and everything. She said the brain is an electronic device, just like a car. Electricity travels in a least path of resistance. So with the traumatic brain injury, with the IEDs, the neurons is separate, is broken. And so the body heals itself. And so when it heals itself, it may not connect back in the right places. For an example, Ricky was an excellent shot. He was right hand dominant. He shot himself with his left hand. So he used a non-dominant hand to shoot himself with. So the disconnection and reconnecting of those neurons in the brain, those connectors, makes sense to me. And somebody else may call bullshit, but that's my theory. That's my story. I'm sticking with it.
The pain of Ricky's death will never go away, but it forced Paul to become more introspective about his own life and find a new purpose, helping others with theirs.
My next chapter is, I do not want you or anyone in this room to go through the same shit that I've done or the same pain. Don't complain on the sideline. Get in a game and do something for it. Do something, work from the inside out. We're too busy with our own personal lives, with bullshit to pay attention. But our society, we don't have time to listen. If you ask somebody, how are you doing today? If they tell you, they start telling you, they start dumping on you, you always make an excuse to get out of the room or leave because you don't want to hear it. So that's my theory. I think that we need to stop, listen, and pay attention. Sometimes the only thing it takes is, dang, dude, what's going on? And listen.
Today we thank Paul and Ricky for their service and commend Paul for his bravery to share his story, to help others, and keep Ricky's memory alive. For our next segment, I sat down with U.S. Army veteran Justin Verholst. Justin is a former artilleryman who returned home from tours in Afghanistan with tinnitus. Tinnitus is a constant ringing in the eardrums that's been known to cause depression or even suicidal thoughts. We thank Justin for his story and his interview. So this episode is all about listening, and we talked about, kind of what it means to listen, and people like maybe they're hearing the words, but they're not actually listening to the message that people are talking about. I understand that you have tinnitus, and what is that like, and does that make it harder to, listen to what somebody's actually saying or just hearing the words? What is it like to go through every day or go through parts of the day with tinnitus?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'm actually, I went to college for communications, which is kind of ironic because I ended up being an artilleryman in the Army. And as you can imagine, that did a number on my ears. And, after a long period of time working with the VA, I was finally able to secure a pair of hearing aids, and it seems to help. But, listening, you have a really good point there. There's a really big difference between hearing and listening is what I always say. And it's like kind of communication 101, right? So, we like to call it active listening. You're engaged and you're really empathetic about what's going on. But that tinnitus, that high pitch ringing in the ears, and for some people it's low. Everybody experiences different tones and frequencies, and it can hinder my ability to process, auditory speech sometimes, and I'm kind of working on that. Especially in a loud environment, when I'm out at a restaurant or I'm out with my family and someone's trying to talk to me and there's a lot of background noise, it can be difficult to focus on that one person's speech. Yeah, absolutely.
So when you were doing artillery and stuff, I take it that was a lot of practice with the firearm. We're kind of right in your ear. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, as an artilleryman, I was on a howitzer. So big, big gun. It's a surreal experience. There's different positions, and I started off as the number one man. And for those of you, for those who don't know what that is I was the guy unloading and unloading rounds. So as you can imagine, I was right in the proximity of that breach all the time, slinging rounds, unloading casings, and it just, people are like, well, why don't you wear your pro? And I'm like, well, in a combat situation, it's kind of, at least my opinion, I really wanted to hear my surroundings and just, being around that gun definitely did a number.
Would they provide you earplugs, or did they talk to you at all about the dangers for your ears, or is that just kind of not even mentioned? Or
yeah, they give you your earplugs, and they're like, here's your high tech, high speed earplugs, and they kind of give you a little spiel, but I mean, we really did. We wore them for the ranges for training, right? But
yeah.
But in the heat of the moment, when you're when you're there in theater, dealing with all this stuff, it's you want to be able to be aware. So I personally kept them out, and I wanted to be able to hear what was going on around me.
Yeah, for sure. Did you deploy? Were you doing that in real scenarios?
Yeah, absolutely. I was in Afghanistan. I was in the Kunar province, so we were slinging rounds. Kind of defending the command outpost that I was stationed at, which was, it was really tough. Someone decided. I mean, I'm not pointing fingers, but somebody put a gun line at the bottom of a valley surrounded by mountains, and as you can imagine, that's kind of undesirable scenario when people are just lobbing stuff at you. So, but yes, absolutely, the artillery piece, I did that over there, and it was fast, it was high pace, and I mean, I'd do it all again. I met some really cool people. And
so, in terms of time, how much time are you exposed to these super loud, being right next to this?
Oh yeah, every day,
Yeah.
every day over there. it was just a second nature thing. You will be exposed to loud noises, whether it's the howitzer, whether it's indirect fire, whether it's generators, whether it's military vehicles. Yeah, you were definitely exposed to those kind of loud noises over there.
So did it kind of the signs and symptoms of tinnitus, did that start right away? Was that like after you were had a long day of, artillery?
Yeah, so and not to sound insensitive or corny, but the movies and video games kind of got it right and nailed it on the head with this one. So when I experienced my first indirect fire event, it really did sound like somebody threw a flashbang in Call of Duty. Like it was just that high pitch, ringing sound. And I started it kind of went away at first, and I was like, okay, wow, that was weird. But then, as the months went by, I would say maybe a couple months later, it started to kind of just show up. I would just be doing my normal ops overseas, and it would just go off. Certain frequencies would set it off. Yeah.
Gosh, that must be tough to not know like when it's going to happen, or like, are there coping strategies that you have for like when it occurs, or just kind of you just got to grin and kind of get through it? Or
yeah, so for me it's kind of on and off. Certain frequencies again trigger it for some reason, the sound of a plane at the airport or something high pitch will set it off for me. But sometimes it is also steady. It's like a steady ring. And when that happens, I did reach out, and I've gotten help with the VA. They've given me these hearing aids, and they're special. They're actually specifically designed for tinnitus. So they're programmed to have a tinnitus option setting to where I could play like ocean waves or something to get my brain off of it. Because as you know, we can't really cure tinnitus, but we can kind of, make it a little bit easy to bear with. So yeah, those really help a lot.
And, I'm curious, like I know several of the veterans I know wear earplugs and or earbuds, or they just call them their ears or whatever, but they all it seems like a very commonplace thing to have tinnitus if you're a veteran. How many of your friends and stuff have that? Is it something you guys talk about? Do you notice if somebody else around you might be having those kind of symptoms? Or
yeah, so when it comes to that, the word on the street is only combat veterans have tinnitus. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not true. I do know, I have friends in the Navy, I have friends in the Air Force, and as you can imagine, what do Navy, what do sailors, what are they exposed to all the time? Carriers, generators, jets, machinery, and the same goes for the Air Force. So, and that's all it takes, just being exposed to those loud, high-pitched frequencies all the time.
What would you say to somebody that, might be having similar symptoms but is hesitant to reach out? What words of support would you offer somebody in that kind of scenario? Maybe somebody that just got out of the military and is transitioning back and noticing a ringing in their ears.
My advice is just kind of make the connection, be heard. I know, no pun intended, but so be heard. There are resources out here in this community that can help you with the auditory stuff like that, and it is worth it. It's worth going through the steps and the motions to kind of get to that manageable point, right? To kind of take control of that ringing in your ears. Definitely contact Next Chapter, because as military members or veterans, we have this strong sense of pride. We're very proud of our military service. If there's a chink in our armor, we're going to get kind of, down and low. And, if anybody gets to that point because of the ringing in their ears, if that really, really brings them down and makes them sad, please reach out to Next Chapter. I definitely think there's a connection there. And they can definitely get you on the right track.
I concluded my conversation with Damien and Ken by asking about how to identify nonverbal signs or indicators that someone might be struggling with behavioral health issues. This is what they said.
Oftentimes a veteran will always tell you, no, I'm good. So if someone is a little more louder, they're a little more upbeat, they're making more jokes than normal, trying to get more people around them to laugh than they normally do, that could be a sign in the veteran community that something's wrong. Society and what we've been taught about behavioral health and mental health would tell us that's the exact opposite. That people who are depressed oftentimes, shut the curtains, cover up in a dark room, and just shut the world away. And that's not the case. That's absolutely a stereotype that's not true for all people. Like I said, some people, they become more outgoing and want to make people laugh more. And so when we have listening with our eyes, it's not less looking out for specific things. It's looking out for changes in personality, changes in how they've been acting recently, good or bad. So some people might see that and be like, oh, like they're improving, they're doing better. Really, let's take a step back and look at the core issues and see if things have really gotten better, or are they just trying to make people laugh to feel better about themselves?
In the profession, we've heard of that as masking. As clinicians, we're dialed into masking. I think it's really hard for family members and others to see masking. But I would argue that family members do, that they can see when someone is masking their feelings or masking their thoughts, especially if those thoughts are destructive. And sometimes, as Ken says, it can be a lot of energy. It can be a lot of good things. It can be a real hype trying to bring everybody else sort of together and up to elevate the mood. And a hope that will bring their mood up too. Now, that doesn't often work. And family members might see that as a mask. And especially in, circumstances like, mania, you can see a lot of that masking going on. And the family will know that this is a part of the process they have to sort of hang on to or hang on for the ride, because they know that something more significant might come at the end of that high energy or manic type episode. We often hear when we talk to people around suicide prevention that there were no indicators or there were no clues. And sometimes that's very true. But other times the person who has sort of made the decision that this is how they're going to cope with the stress in their life engages in a masking process.
So this led to me asking, how do family members get beyond the mask and get their loved ones to take that leap and seek professional help? This is what Damien said.
Yeah, and I would offer too that for family members, who are struggling to get, veteran family members in to talk to somebody, that some of that is a skill that they can build also, which is rather than constantly pushing back and, rather than constantly saying, you're crazy, you got to go see somebody, is to sort of outlay it the way I hear you, you're communicating, your expression, you're telling me what you need. How then do I help you with that, right? So we don't expect family members to be therapists or anything like that, but at a minimum, you could say, how do I help you with that? And just doing that helps that veteran understand they are being heard, that they're being listened to, and they're being listened where it's important. So it's not about, I understand you're angry about having to go to Afghanistan. I understand that you lost friends in Iraq. Got it. But that's not what they're asking for. What they're asking for is somebody to figure out how to help them with that. And just being able to say, I hear that you're asking me for help. How do I do that?
Gotcha.
I know these next chapter people. Give them a call.
Yeah, 888-719-VETS. They're good at listening.
This has been the Next Chapter podcast. Special thanks to Lindsay Caroon, Camille Blakely, Mike Lewis, Ted Robinson, Windstar Studios, and 1116 Studios. If you or someone you know is considering suicide, dial 988 and then press 1. We hope you listen again. Thanks.